we're headed out on another adventure. I'm here with Chevy Prez and Life with Ron. Ron, tell us where we're going today.
We're going to the Early Television Museum in Hilliard, Ohio. It tells the history of the beginning of television up to the early colorization in about the 1950s. So we get to see a lot of cool things.
So come along with us, and we'll show you what it's all about.
Light gold shining bright every day and night. Join the fun, feel the vibe. Everything's alright. From the food to the tech, it's the journey we hype. Hit subscribe, come alive, let's take flight.
Early Television Museum. We're gonna go in and check out these TVs. Upon entering the museum, you're greeted with this room, which sort of gives you an idea of what you have to see in the rest of the museum. The outside is deceptively small, but there's actually a whole lot to see here. They ask for a small donation, and we're going to walk you through some of the highlights.
Philo Farnsworth grew up in rural Idaho and had no formal scientific education. He came up with an idea for a camera tube, got some investors, and moved to San Francisco. In 1927, he produced a crude picture from his camera. The problem was that it required too much light, and he never overcame that limitation. The other inventor was Vladimir Zworykin. Zworykin worked for Westinghouse in the 1920s, where he also made a camera tube and demonstrated it in the late 20s. In 1930, he went to work for RCA, the largest radio manufacturer at the time. RCA was run by David Sarnoff, a visionary who realized that television would be the next big thing, and who spent about $50 million during the Great Depression to develop TV. The sets in this room, and in the small room next to it, were made from 1936 to 1939. This is the earliest British electronic set we have in our collection. It was made in 1936. Since there was only a single TV station in the country, the sets didn't have a channel selector knob. A modest set cost as much as a new car, so only about 19,000 were made during those 3 years. About 300 of these sets survived. Larger screen sets had mirrors to watch the picture. This was because the picture tubes were about 2.5 feet long, and mounting them vertically made it possible to make a more attractive camera. Since television broadcasting was limited to a couple of hours a day, many of the sets had shortwave radios built in. When England declared war on Germany in 1939, television manufacturing and broadcasting ended in England.
The earliest television sets used mechanical means to create a picture.
The first patent for television was granted in 1884. It described a system using rotating discs with holes drilled in them. One disc was in the camera in front of a photoelectric cell. An identical disc was used in the receiver in front of a neon tube. The picture was viewed through a magnifying lens in front of the disc. At that time, many of the components needed to make the system work didn't exist, such as vacuum tubes. Many years later, in 1926, a Scottish inventor named John Logie Baird produced the first television pictures in his laboratory in London. 3 years later, he was broadcasting to viewers. The pictures were extremely crude. Today's television pictures are made up of over 1,000 lines, allowing for very clear pictures. Baird's transmissions were with 30 lines. By 1930, there were about 30 stations in the U.S. and stations in most major European cities. Because they used the same channels as AM radio, signals could be received over long distances. This is the TV set that Baird's company sold starting in 1929. About 1,000 were made. The cabinet is metal, and the viewer watched through the lens on the front. You could buy a TV set, or you could build your own, since they were simple devices. A few years ago, we interviewed Murray Mercier, his pictures on the wall, who told us that as a teenager, he helped his father make the first TV set in Columbus. The small set on the table was their first set. In 1928, they watched some of the first U.S. broadcasts of Schenectady, New York, and Washington, D.C. The next year, they built the larger set on the table. Murray's father rented a store on North High Street and put the set in the front window.
Roy's job was to sit in the window of the store in the evening and keep the set adjusted so people walking up and down High Street could see television. This is the Western Visionette, an example of an American set that was sold to the public. About 500 of these were made. This is the Western Empire State Receiver. About 1932, a new technology emerged which allowed the picture to be projected on the screen, allowing more than one person to watch it. However, the picture was very dim and still only had 45 lines in it. Because of the poor picture quality with mechanical television, it was impossible to do real television programming. Because of this, and since the Great Depression limited the number of people who could afford television sets, mechanical TV broadcasting came to an end in 1932.
Some of these were really only designed for one person to be able to view at a time. Right, these systems were for up to 120 lines in the picture. It's hard to imagine having something like this in your home. And don't you wonder what kind of programming was shown? It's amazing that all of these items are housed together in a collection. Look at this. This is like the size of a refrigerator, really. Absolutely massive. Just to give a little perspective, so here's a chart of what things cost in 1930. A car was $525, gasoline 25 cents per gallon, a house was $7,150, bread was 8 cents a loaf, milk 56 cents, postage stamps 2 cents, stock market was at 165, average annual salary was $1,600. So this is sort of interesting because all of the programming, of course, was recorded on cameras, and here this is only one of two in existence. This is an RCA 1939 camera. And here's a photo of what it was like when they were shooting video. This actually has a wooden tripod on it, and probably these boxes were how it was transported, taken apart and transported. A lot of these sets have the mirror, where if you sat back, you can envision how, if you were seated on a couch, you might be able to see the image. But look at how small this screen is. Is this about a 6-inch screen?
Nipper the Dog was first appeared in an 1899 painting by British scenic painter Francis Borrard, an image trademarked by Victor Talking Machine Company and later used by RCA after the company acquired Victor. This paper mache statue is a copycat from another large Nipper statue. Giant Nipper dogs can be found on buildings in Baltimore, Maryland, and Albany, New York. This copy came from RCA Consumer Electronics headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana.
So here's an example of one of the tubes. It says this tube was made in 1939 and used in all US 12-inch mirror and lid sets. The reason for the mirror in lid designs is that the 12 AP4 is so long that a set made with the tube mounted horizontally would stick out too far from the wall. And it survived all these years, which is pretty astounding. This cabinet is particularly beautiful, and it kind of shows how, TV sets were important not only in their functionality but also in their aesthetics, because people were viewing them as a piece of furniture as well, especially if you had something like this that would have your TV and also your record player. But when that is closed, it really would just look like a buffet of some sort that would blend in with your decor, which is sort of like what a lot of people want now, where their TV hangs above a fireplace, or Some of them have the ability to put a painting on the screen to emulate a picture and sort of blend in seamlessly. Well, this is probably the idea behind this cabinet that was hinged and could be closed. And notice the scroll work here. Looks like some doors, cabinetry, and some decorative elements. That could definitely blend in. And show you some more examples of these cabinets. And these are more of the tabletop sets. This cabinet had different veneers on it, different color wood that was popular in the 1950s. It would go along with the decor. All of these wood cabinets, I'm sure these are quite heavy as well, because everything was built to such an overbuilt standard. You see the speaker down at the bottom. All right, so these two sets were examples of sort of a lower end and a higher end, sort of the entry-level model with the very small monitor here.
There's a 5-inch monitor.
5-inch. And then if you upgrade it to this
9-inch.
one, you see it has more detail as well as a larger screen.
So that one would have been $295 for the low-end model, and the high-end model would go up to $450, which in that time was a lot of money.
Well, right, considering that the average salary was, I think, around $1,600. So this was a very significant investment. And despite this being the low-end model, it was probably really only reserved for extremely wealthy individuals who could afford something like this. So probably very rare, and also probably very coveted. So imagine if a family had one of these, I'm sure they would probably quickly become the most popular family on the block. Just for perspective, you look at the size of the cell phone screen versus what this television had, and you can see how far technology has advanced. We're entering this room here, which is American sets from 1945 to 1948.
During the war, engineers learned a lot about technology, especially from radar and aircraft communication that could be applied to television. As a result, the sets made right after the war were much simpler, more reliable, and cheaper. A typical 10 or 12-inch set cost about $400 compared to about $1,600 for a car. These sets are from right after the war. As you can see, manufacturers were experimenting with all sorts of cabinet designs to find out what would sell. There were dozens of companies making sets. In 1948, the 7-inch set was introduced. Some with built-in magnifiers. This might seem like a step backward, but it allowed sets to be sold for under $200. Because the cost of a television set kept dropping, television grew very rapidly. At the end of 1947, there were only 200,000 sets in the United States. By the end of 1953, 6 years later, there were 18 million, and half the homes in the country had TV. The Emerson Videograph video jukebox was made in 1947, before most people had seen television. Put a quarter in, and you could either listen to 5 songs from its jukebox or watch TV for 30 minutes. This is the Dumont Custom. It was made to mount in a wall in your living room. There had to be a closet behind it for servicing, since something went wrong with the early sets frequently. A set like this was expensive, almost $2,000.
Largest black and white set ever made, almost $2,000.
In the late 50s, manufacturers started using plastic and metal for cabinets. The gold and red RCA portable and Opera Sylvania Dualette are examples.
One of the first portables. So with all these TVs, you have to wonder, how was the signal transmitted? And here is an example of one of the antennas, a channel master here, that you had this portion on your TV, and you could rotate the antenna to get the signal you needed. I wanted to show a closer look of this one with the number 5 on it. And this model would have been used primarily in bars or venues where groups of people would be watching rather than an individual home. And I can envision that this screen was probably considered absolutely huge in those days. And look at the cabinet here on this one. It's actually sort of, wouldn't even really know that a TV is housed in there with those doors and the appearance of really a beautiful hutch or some sort of cabinet. Some of them had more of a space-aged design, sort of like this portable set, or one of these with metal. I'd say this one had a handle on the top that you could move around into different rooms.
The first color television system was invented by John Logie Baird, the same person who demonstrated the first working black and white system in 1926. A wheel containing segments of each of the 3 primary colors was placed in front of the camera and another one in front of the receiver. One after another, red, blue, and green images were transmitted. It happened so fast that your eye integrated the picture into a full color image. The same method, called the field sequential system, was used by CBS before World War II in an electronic version. After the war, CBS pressured the government to adopt a color system before black and white set sales took off. The main problem with the CBS system was that it wasn't compatible with black and white broadcasting. 2 channels will be required in each city for each station, one for color and one for black and white. RCA was working on a compatible system, but progress was slow. Finally, in 1950, the FCC, which regulates TV standards, agreed to hold a competition between the RCA compatible system and the CBS field sequential system to see which would be the standard for the United States. At the time, the RCA system was in the early stages of development and produced poor pictures. The CBS system produced excellent pictures, and the FCC adopted the CBS system. A few programs were broadcast in a few cities, including Columbus, in 1951. This is a studio monitor for the CBS system. To the left of it is a converter, which was placed in front of the black and white set to produce a color picture. RCA was making great progress on its compatible system, and by 1951 it was clear that they would be successful. So CBS abandoned its system in late 1951. The RCA system was finally adopted by the FCC as the color standard at the end of 1953. Here are the first color sets sold to the public in the spring of 1954. The Westinghouse and RCA sets had only 12-inch screens and cost over $1,000. At that time, you could get a very nice 21-inch black and white set for $250. As a result, only about 5,000 were sold. During 1955, sets with 21-inch screens were introduced. Over the next 10 years, the sets got somewhat cheaper, but few were sold because of the cost, unreliability, and lack of many color programs. In the mid-60s, RCA teamed up with Walt Disney to produce a show called The Wonderful World of Color. Its purpose was to sell color TV sets, and it worked. 1970 was the first year in which more color sets were sold than black and white.
Look at all these picture tubes. I wonder if this was a part that would need frequent replacement. Look at the size of some of these. This one in particular. 1951. It's amazing that these glass components have managed to remain all these years. Here on the back of this set, you can see the color reveal they were talking about with the red and blue and green that would rotate.
So this would be just like a regular screen. And color wheel would be back there with the light projecting against it, and it'd be spinning, 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 and that'd give you a form of color.
This has sort of a magnifying glass attached to the front, probably to magnify, of course, the picture that was produced very small. This would help make it appear larger and better to see. So here's a few examples of what that was like, along with some more of the color wheels below to help make that color picture. So this room shows the equipment that was used to actually film the programs. And this makes me think about those programs that were popular at the time. And many of these units probably were used in the filming and production of those shows. Think about I Love Lucy or The Honeymooners, those kinds of shows from that era, and these were absolutely huge. So I guarantee you, these were not inexpensive. So these very units were probably the ones used to film some of those famous television shows. Because if you think about it, there weren't all that many shows. There weren't all that many hours of broadcast television happening. Primarily from hearing my grandparents and parents speak about television in that day, you might have turned it on for a few hours in the evening after dinner and watched a show. Of course, you have to remember, you didn't have any way in which to record them. So when they talk about must-see TV, people really did rush home to watch their favorite programs. And people talked about them the next day, because everyone was at home watching the same shows. It wasn't like today where there are hundreds of choices to look at and streaming and all sorts of different things. Everyone primarily watched the same shows. So this would have been a WGSF television, channel 31 in Newark. So this would have been their vehicle, I'm sure, when they went out to location to film something, perhaps for the news. They would have done so in a vehicle like this. So this is an RCA remote van. The van was made by RCA in 1948 and originally sold to KDYL in Salt Lake City. Later, the call sign was changed to KCPX. In 1969, the van was purchased by WGSF-TV, an educational station in Newark, Ohio. After several years of use, the van was donated to the Ohio Historical Society, which had loaned it to the Early Television Museum. A lot of history. I'm glad that this was preserved. Let's take a little look inside. Wow. Those seats there in the back. And all of this equipment, I'm sure this was something that really took a lot of training and specialization to know how to operate all this. Here are some photos from the vehicle's earlier times in use, and there was a hatch there on the roof where they could be up top filming. So actually it appears that we can step into this vehicle. And here is the hatch where they were able to get out onto the roof and film up there. You have 3 seats. All of this equipment here. They had added an air conditioner on the back. I'm sure without that it would have been like a tin can in here with no insulation. A very rudimentary control panel here. Very interesting to see this still in existence. One last look.
Alright, so this is the size of our cameras now for us YouTubers, but back in the original days with the OG YouTubers, they used stuff this big.
That's right. Long before we all had the ability to film our own content, everything was captured on a unit like this. And all of the hours of TV, like the Honeymooners and the I Love Lucy type programming, I'm quite sure that these were used in either those sorts of programming or probably for individual news stations. And their anchors, their news anchors, would have been in front of these cameras, reading teleprompters perhaps. And some of these would have been more mobile to be able to take out on location for the news using vans like this. It's been a really fascinating look into the early days of television. So thanks for joining me on this adventure through the early years of television. Again, at the Early Television Museum in Hilliard, Ohio. I would highly recommend checking it out if you're in the area, or even if you're not. It's a great destination to come and see some of the history of television. So if you haven't subscribed yet, it's not too late. If you have, welcome to the family. I love you for watching.